Oh, okay. Why are you recording?
Florida's more likely. What do you want to do in Florida? The world is in Florida. What discount?
Hillary, do we already want to be recording?
Let me see if I can figure out how to shut it off. I will.
Hold,
I mean,
bite your tongue, Kurt. Bite your tongue. Hillary, I had it. Oh, never mind.
Are we almost a minute?
Oh, I want to shut off the recording first. So.
okay, the meeting's recording. We're ready to go.
Fantastic. Well, let's call the meeting to order at 3:01. Thank everyone for joining us. We do have a quorum. This is a very, very exciting meeting in the sense that, you know, Scott and Anastasia have worked extremely hard over the last, specifically the last 3 or 4 months to really nail down a sewer shed proposal, which the Board of Selectmen had requested, and that members of this committee requested that we include a sewer overlay in this final plan. And so I think this is, you know, it's indicative of a lot of very hard work that we are where we are today, and probably pretty close to one of the last acts that the Clean Water Advisory Committee will be engaged with in terms of, you know, I think our charter really ends with, you know, getting a watershed permit plan in place. So I also want to thank, you know, the other committee members, Richard and Fred, John, who's relatively new and isn't on the call, but there are a lot of committee members that have been involved with this effort over the last 12 years. And it has been 12 years to ultimately bring this to some kind of a hopefully a conclusion, or at least the start of actually really doing something positive for the watershed. So with that, I think the agenda really is, Scott, I don't know if you and Anastasia want to do just some brief overviews of the changes and revisions since our last iteration on this. Maybe that would be the best part for committee members for their benefit. And then, of course, you know, any committee member that either has read the report or has questions. It's 72 pages, including Anastasia's appendix. So I guess I would start with, maybe let's just start with Scott, or let's start with Anastasia, because the new piece really is the sewer shed, and probably the most appropriate place to start is there in your fine work.
Sounds great. Let me see if I can share. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. So I wanted to provide a brief overview today of the preliminary sewer analysis methodology that was done, and then to give an opportunity for questions from the memo that was attached to the TWMP. So the preliminary sewer analysis focused on 2 different approaches that Scott and I worked very closely to develop. The first is a hybrid approach. So that looks at maximizing the use of non-sewering technologies, which we'll discuss in a little bit more detail in a second. And the second is a traditional approach. So that's the other, we call these bookends. One is the most optimistic plan with the maximum amount of hybrids. And then the second is something that Mass DEP requires. It's the traditional, if some or all of those pilot projects don't perform as anticipated, what would the extent of treatment need to be with INAs with a general use approval, which is 19 milligrams per liter, and then with centralized sewering. So I'll show conceptual sewer sheds for both of those approaches. and then discuss the conceptual cost estimates for both of those approaches. So this is an outline of the different technologies in the two approaches. So the hybrid, oh, sorry, let me go back for a second. The hybrid relies on INA systems with a total nitrogen concentration of 8 milligrams per liter. So that's currently a provisional system, but is within the realm of what initial testing is showing from some of the provisional systems. And it also includes fertilizer mitigation, stormwater reduction, aquaculture, ecological restoration, and centralized sewering, both in a private component and then in a municipal component. And the municipal component is focused on Duck Creek and the Cove, on two of the subwatersheds. The other end of the bookend is the traditional approach, which utilizes INA systems with an effluent TN concentration of 19 milligrams per liter and a much larger centralized collection system and treatment. And this is a figure from the memo that shows how the centralized treatment component fits into the overall MEP compliance plan. So as I noted, the two areas that we're targeting are Duck Creek and the Cove. These are areas that had been identified previously in the commercial district for potential sewering. And then we also have an offset. So in our conceptual cost estimates, both of the treatment sites that we're looking for would recharge to the Herring River. So in our analysis, we looked at what would we need to offset in terms of nitrogen management strategies to offset the load that's being introduced back into that subwatershed, and that's factored into the calculations. We had an initial meeting with DEP where they recommended this plan be conducted for a 20-year planning horizon. So both of these approaches look at a 20-year population projection for the amount of nitrogen that it's mitigating to meet TMDL goals. And this is a conceptual layout of what that sewer shed would look like. I had presented this initially at a former meeting of the Clean Water Advisory Committee, and there had been some very good comments about how portions of Kendricks Avenue have notoriously high groundwater and are in the same watershed that we're targeting. So we did adjust the sewer shed to pick up those portions in the Cove. So the sewer shed really focuses on portions of Kendrick Avenue and East Commercial Street. The cost estimates that are in the memo assume that we would have a force main that goes to the transfer station. For the quantity of flow that we're looking at here, there's another parcel that's been identified in Town Hall that may have potential for effluent recharge, which would be more cost effective than going to the transfer station. However, it would require further investigations, both in modeling to verify where that flow would go, and then in field investigations to verify its hydraulic capacity to see if it could be used for that application.
Anastasia, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if I could just ask a question regarding
Sure.
that. Based on the preliminary estimate of what Town Hall parking lot could potentially support, and obviously, you've caveated the need to do additional hydrogeologic assessment, but based on the preliminary estimate, how much of the Duck Creek and the Cove overlays that you're presenting here could potentially, could that site potentially absorb?
Potentially the majority. The big caveat that I'll give is that would require another site for the treatments, right? So you want to site treatment and effluent disposal. So if you focus just on effluent disposal on that subsurface site, and what's been identified is the parking lot at Town Hall. So putting in a subsurface system underneath the parking lot. If you look at that just for disposal, you likely would be, or it's in the order of magnitude of these two sewer sheds.
And the church parking lot across from Preservation Hall is also town land, and we did kind of look a little bit at the possibility that could be added in terms of potentially a disposal area.
Wonderful.
So anyway, I just trying to get our brains wrapped around that, because
Yeah.
obviously you've modeled this based on, force main to the transfer station, which is probably the most expensive approach to accomplish the goal. And clearly there may be a less expensive option for us.
Yeah, if you can save the cost of building this pipeline and pumping a significant portion, that would be a much more cost-effective solution.
Okay, this is Fred. I'm just trying to understand what you're saying here. Basically, which I'm hearing, and maybe I'm not, is that if we set up a sewage disposal leaching area underneath the town hall parking lot, that would be more cost effective than pumping it all out to the transfer station. Is that the simplest way of-
Exactly.
And would that leaching area underneath the, maybe I'm using the correct terminology, under the town hall parcel, and maybe also the parcel under the church, across from the church, could that handle both the Duck Creek source shed and the Cove source shed?
It's in the order of magnitude of what's been laid out.
So in other words, it could.
Yes,
Fred,
so I will caveat that it will need further investigation, but
It
it
might.
could.
It
Fred,
might.
Fred, I can jump in here. I looked at those plans with Hillary and actually Emily Beebe, who did some of the work on it originally. And we kind of looked at the setbacks from the lot lines and produced a rectangle of potential leaching area. And then we applied, I think, a 3 or a 4 gallon per day per square foot rate. And using those assumptions, it looks like it works. What Anastasia is saying is we need more test pits. We need, that assumes it's highly permeable, which is a pretty good guess.
Yeah.
And that also assumes there's enough depth to groundwater, which I think is a pretty good guess. But
Yeah.
until you do these things, nobody's going to put their name on it. So I think I think the answer is it's a reasonable assumption, but until we do the more detailed work, we really can't confirm it. But actually that was all done before the second parcel that I think Hillary identified across from the church.
The
So-
preservation.
Yeah,
Hall.
so I tend to think this is a reasonably good bet, but again, until the detailed work is done, we don't know.
But we've
How
got
long a time would
Oh, go ahead, Richard.
I had a question. How long would it take to do the detailed testing to know whether those two sites are going to work?
Not very long, a couple of months. To do
Anastasia, did you ever put together the cost proposal to do that work for us? I know we had talked about it at a couple previous meetings.
I have it. I haven't sent it to you, Hillary. So I'll do
Okay.
that shortly after this meeting. But I
Okay,
do have those
excellent.
costs pulled together.
Thank
But
you.
I think the thinking has been, though, that we don't need that to submit this to DEP. We know that DEP is very happy with the transfer station. So we can get this, we'll talk about timing later, but my eyes are on August 15th. And I want to get the plan in if the town approves it. In no way does that commit you going to the transfer station. If they approve the plan, and then anytime between now and then or beyond that, the town can investigate this other alternative. So I think, there's pros and cons of doing it now.
Well, and also the other trade-off there that's still, regardless, what we've got is a plan that meets the threshold requirements, regardless of where the disposal is. And that's the key thing. That's the main thing. If we go to the transfer station, that's putting in a forced main and making a connection that can pick up other loads in the future. So there is some trade-off with both approaches that warrant some additional discussion. But I think as the plan, I think as you get into the alternatives and present the rest of the plan, then that probably isn't necessary anyway. So anybody, Richard, did you have any other questions on that?
No, I just want to get a sense of, what the timing was.
And I think Anastasia has a few more slides.
Yeah. So this next slide outlines the traditional approach. So as you can see, we're looking at much fewer technologies, INAs and centralized treatments. And we're looking at picking up load in every watershed except for Hatches. And there's a much larger load being added back to Herring River, which requires a pretty substantial system in that area to offset it. And that system has been captured in our cost estimates. And we're trying to meet the exact same targets for nitrogen reduction for our 20-year planning period, just using different puzzle pieces. This is a conceptual layout of the approximate extent of what that sewer shed would look like. And the cost estimates that were developed for this quantity of flow, you would need to go to the transfer station for treatment and then for effluent recharge at the station. And there are opportunities to lessen this plan and to have a different hybrid approach in between these two bookends. But what we wanted to present was the maximum use and then the most traditional version.
So Anastasia, just for everybody's benefit, I'm assuming that the colored portions like in Logie Bay and Drummer and Wellfleet Harbor, each of those colored portions are connected to the system?
Yes.
And
the different colors represent the different subwatersheds that they're in.
Right. Just so we're clear, how do you go about choosing like one portion of Logie Bay and not another portion, or one portion of Blackfish Creek and not another?
So we typically look for the density of parcels. This analysis was done on a GIS database that looked at water use per parcel. So the denser the parcels are, the less sewer you have to run, the more cost effective the system. So we tried to basically get sewer sheds that would be as cost effective as possible based on water usage.
And
then for the portions in the northern, we wanted to make it as contiguous as possible. So you're not hopping in different portions of the different watersheds as you're picking up load.
So for example, are the Drummer and Logie Bay portions the most cost-effective portions in order to meet the overall reduction target?
Yes.
Okay.
Or one of
Could you
the
pick up the
most
other-
cost-effective.
Could you pick up the other areas at a later date? The other areas in Drummer
You
Cove
could,
and Logie Bay?
yes. Yeah. So what we typically do when we size the collection system is, even if you aren't planning to, we can size the piping, because the piping lasts 50 to 100 years. It's going to be in the ground for a very long time. So you can size that pipe so that in the future you have the flexibility to pick up additional portions if there's a desire.
So if we went to this traditional approach and say we started off with Wellfleet Harbor and Duck Creek area, and then we pumped it all out to the transfer station, we could add in Wellfleet Harbor, Drummer Cove, Logie Bay, and additional areas in the future. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. Yeah.
And can I ask you another question? And I'm just looking at this. I assume all those grids that are sitting in Wellfleet Harbor, those are oyster grants?
I
They
think
have
so,
parcel
yeah.
lines on your GIS.
Yes.
And
Yeah, I
then
believe
they
they are,
talked
Fred.
about this. Yeah.
So my question is why don't we have this? I'm just because I kind of know that there's a bunch of oyster grants in Wellfleet Harbor, near Wellfleet Harbor. I just maybe it would be. I mean, like, it's a very pretty map, but it's not really consistent because shouldn't there be oyster grants in Wellfleet Harbor too?
Yeah,
So-
I have that map. I think you're right, Fred. Anastasia, maybe what we can do is blue those out, because I don't
Okay.
think we want this distraction when you're presenting it. And you're right, Fred. It looks like it's inconsistent.
Yeah, I'm like going, wait a minute, what happened to all that?
Yeah, you're right. I just was looking at the maps.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
Either put them in or take the ones
Right.
out. of Wellfleet
Yeah,
Harbor,
I'd
you
say
know.
I'd take them out, Anastasia.
I get that question from everybody I show this map to, so let's just fix it and eliminate
What
the
is that?
confusion. Completely agree.
Okay, good. Thanks, Anastasia. So but this is once again, this is the high price, really big ticket item is
I
like.
think that's the next slide, right?
Okay, no,
It's
no.
a couple slides down. Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah,
here we
it
go.
is.
I'll shut up.
No, these are great questions. One other thing that I wanted to note just on the question of, is this the most cost effective? This was done looking at a very high level view. If the town pursues this option, they would look at what type of collection system technology would be implemented, a gravity or a low pressure system. And that analysis would help refine which parcels would be the most cost effective. Because if you're going for a gravity system and you can connect more by gravity, you may want to pick up a different area in the watershed instead of what's been previously identified. So it would be tweaked as part of future design. I just wanted to make that note.
Okay.
So this is a summary of the basis of design for both options. For the hybrid approach, where we're focusing on Duck Creek and the Cove, there would be approximately 280 properties tied into the system. As you look at that much larger centralized system, it's about 2,400 properties that are tied into the system. And then the average annual flow, as we talked about, this is in the vicinity of what could potentially be recharged at the town hall parking lot, 37,000 gallons per day average annual and 59,000 per day max month. For the traditional, it's a much larger system with almost 320,000 gallons per day average annual and a little over 1 million when you look at your maximum day, which is the most water that you treat in one day, typically in the summer.
Hey, Anastasia, can I jump in here?
Yeah.
I talked to Ryan Curley about an hour or two ago, and he had a number of questions and comments on what we've done. One of his questions, and you and I can talk about this maybe next week with Mark, is
Sure.
he was wondering if this 59,000 number, the commercial flows you used, is conservative enough. He was wondering if we're maybe using too low of a per commercial flow. And so we don't need to get into the details of that now, but if we can just make a footnote to talk about that next week, just because that might come up as a question.
That's a great question. And that can be adjusted. Yeah, so this initial estimate was done based on other regional facilities of that size, but knowing the unique characteristics of the commercial flow, we can tweak that.
Okay.
And then for
Should I
both
give you the drum
sorry, go
roll
ahead.
now? Should I give you the drum roll for the next slide?
Next slide. Sure.
Well, the question I was going to ask, so just on the nitrogen numbers, is if the does that affect the nitrogen removal number?
It does. It does. So in my analysis for the traditional approach, the much larger, you actually can't recharge at 10 milligrams per liter because you can't take enough nitrogen out of Herring River. So we have to go down to at least 5, just based on the quantity of nitrogen you're reintroducing, which is why we did 5. The limit of technology is 3, but that's a very stringent limit. So we felt that 5 would give a little more flexibility to the town in its operations.
What's just Anastasia? I mean, like 5 milligrams seems really great. You know, what would be like, you know, it's sort of like, okay, what would be good? What would be okay? What would be great? So is 5 milligrams great or is 5 milligrams good? You know,
I would say for the system, 5 milligrams per liter is very good.
okay.
You would have likely for that, you would have a system that's capable of meeting 3 milligrams per liter. So you could get it even tighter.
Mhm.
But 5 gives you a little more flexibility for upsets in the system. So you would aim for even higher, but you don't want your permit limit to be the most you can do out of your plants. 3 is limit of technology. So that's absolutely as far down as you can typically get nitrogen.
As an example, Falmouth has a permit limit of 3. They might be one of the only ones, and they meet it, but they struggle. It's very, very tricky.
So would it be smarter to say, hey, listen, we're gonna get to 8. And then if we do better, well, hey, we did better. You know?
I think 5
Well,
is okay. 5 is
Yeah,
okay.
it's, at the end of the day, Fred, it's, I think, and if I'm, if I'm misstating, somebody else can correct me, but at the end of the day, it's whatever we're going to agree to in a permit.
Yeah.
And what we're going to agree to in a permit is what DEP is going to give us credit for nitrogen removal.
Uh-huh.
So it's kind of that, so what do we want to agree to in a permit? And, so we would obviously have to rely on Anastasia's expertise in terms of guiding us as far as what would be reasonable versus what would potentially put the town in a bind. And at the end of the day, that becomes a permit. And so we have to meet it. And that's where Falmouth is right now, having difficulty meeting 3.
So my theory that we should make it 6 or 7 or 8 would
Is
probably,
reasonable, is very reasonable.
yeah, like going, hey, we're doing better than 19. Isn't the number I remember is that the standard system is putting 19 milligrams per liter in.
Yeah, the problem though, Fred, is at 19, we can't meet the MEP thresholds.
No, I know, but I mean, like,
Yeah.
really good if we're cutting.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, that's what IAs are doing. Now, the interesting thing is, so 19 is what IAs are doing. The really interesting thing is the trend with the advanced treatment or enhanced septic is doing, 8, 5, and 3. I mean, so we're seeing very similar numbers from the enhanced treatment septic.
Okay. And I'm going to ask one more question, and I'm going to try to let you guys move on. Is there any other site like the town hall parking lot or the what was the Catholic Church parking lot and is now the Preservation Hall parking lot that could pick up like Logie Bay or the Cove, the Cove side? Is there any other place that we can say, hey, wait a minute, why do we have to pump it all the way out to the transfer station? We could do the same thing we did in town for these high density areas, and we could use this spot.
How big is your backyard?
Not my backyard.
I think there's a lot of possibilities that still can be explored as far as how to do this more efficiently. But at the end of the day, per the next slide, we probably don't want to continue to push in the most expensive direction, and we want to push in directions that are less expensive.
Well, that was my point. Is that my understanding was picking up all of those different sewer sheds was under the impression that we're pumping it all to the dump.
Yeah, Fred, it's actually not a crazy idea, because in Barnstable, they're actually talking, I mean, one response is you still have to pump it to a central treatment plant to get the cost efficiency. But in Barnstable, they're running out of room hydraulically, meaning they can't discharge more water in Hyannis. So they're actually talking about digging a ditch and putting in 2 pipes. So, and sending the water into Hyannis, the treatment plant, and then back out to the watershed where it came from for disposal. So your thought here is, I defer to Anastasia on this, but people are talking about, even though you have one central plant, using multiple disposal areas. So it is a possibility.
Okay.
And Falmouth is looking at a similar approach where as they expand, they likely will need remote effluent sites.
Mm-hmm.
There is a cost to it because you're pumping and you have another big force main. So if you can keep it centralized, it's typically more cost effective if that sub-watershed can handle the nitrogen load. And that's part of the strategy of getting the effluent nitrogen low so that you can keep it in that watershed.
Well, that was, yeah. I was like thinking that rather than sending it to a treatment plant and then sending it all the way back, I'm just saying create little treatment plants.
Yeah, and you can do that. Mashpee has that. They have a bunch of different private plants all around town.
Okay.
It would mean that you would need an operator for each of them. So it it is more of an operational burden, but it may be a cost savings, and it's definitely something that could be considered.
Okay, I'm sorry for.
No, those great questions. Thank you.
Okay,
Jude, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Couple questions. Right, I thought we long ago asked for ideas about these smaller cluster systems around town rather than, an extended network going back to the transfer station. So are you saying you haven't quite done that? Or am I mistaken? The rest of you, haven't we been kind of asking for that idea for a while?
The challenge is that to do that, the site has to be under town control. And I think if we go to the next slide, it'll be apparent why the scenario A that Anastasia presented in the first place is probably the preferred approach. And so getting into engineering the last mile, so to speak, of the full sewer system for the entire town probably doesn't make sense.
Well, that's clear that you're doing that, but I was wondering just about these smaller areas as part of the program, which I guess is approach A to some extent. Is that correct?
Yeah, Jude, I'll jump in here. I've had this conversation with Ryan a couple times, including recently as today again. And first of all, in the plan, we do have a section on what we're calling cluster systems, I think. And we talk about the 95 Lawrence as an example of that, because if you look at the numbers for 95 Lawrence, it actually is pretty cost effective. And as Kurt was saying, the trick is to find a site. The reason in my view that 95 Lawrence is cost effective is because you got a lot of density. You've got the housing project, you got the school right next to each other. And when you team that up, it really works nicely and is cost effective. So we have looked a little bit for other opportunities and frankly didn't really see anything like that. It's mostly housing, single family housing and businesses. And, but a future proposal, if somebody comes along, for example, with another affordable housing project or anchor business, that might be a really good thing to consider as another cluster. And that is in the hybrid approach.
Well,
but we don't know what they are right now.
Well, like Main Street, for instance, or closer to the shellfish beds, which we very much want to protect from all this. Like, I know the trailer park was considered, but yeah, I mean, Main Street or, density like that. Or along Commercial Street. I thought that was at one point discussed as maybe that's where the permeable barrier is. I'll have to read that report, but.
Well, that Commercial Street and Main Street are part of the hybrid sewering plan right now. And that essentially is, I guess what I'm viewing is on the hybrid approach, the sewering plan is essentially a large cluster. It's the downtown, it's 50, just to give you an idea, that's 60,000 gallons per day. And the flow out at 95 Lawrence with the neighborhood was 30,000 gallons per day. So it's a larger version. What we have in this plan is the hybrid is essentially a 95 Lawrence times 2 in the downtown area, as you're suggesting. So it's there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's exactly what you're talking about, Jude.
Okay.
So you're right on target. That's exactly what that embodies.
Okay, great. So that was unclear to me. So that's great. So the hybrid approach includes a couple of these cluster systems as its plan. And
one big cluster system, let's call it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, got it. All right, thank you for explaining that.
Yeah, as those evaluations progress, if it makes sense to split up, you could do that, right? And through your adaptive management approach, you would just document those changes to DEP. So this doesn't tie you into one site. Those evaluations can continue as you develop the most cost-effective approach.
Got it. Okay, thank you for explaining that.
So this is the drum roll slide. This is the conceptual cost estimate for the collection system and the treatment plant. So the construction total is what would be the bid value of the project. When you award it to a contractor, what do you anticipate that project to be? Beyond that, we have typical allowances that are incurred with these types of projects that build up to a capital cost. So the capital cost is the overall cost that the town incurs to get this project done. So we have a design allowance. And then the soil borings, the surveys that are needed, police details as you put in your infrastructure, and the engineering that's done as construction, as part of construction. Also, for comparison purposes, we put in allowance for sewer laterals. So typically, a municipality will finance the collection system in the road and a pipe that goes from the road to a property line. And then a property homeowner is responsible for installing what's called a lateral, which will connect that connection to the individual houses. So that this can be compared to other technologies in the plan. We did put in an allowance based on recent cost surveys that were done in Chatham for what a typical single family residence has for the sewer lateral. And so those costs together add up to the capital costs for the two projects.
So I'm sorry, did you give us a number per hookup? I missed that.
Next slide.
Okay, next slide.
You're doing a great job, Fred.
Well, you know, it's great. It's kind of like when you watch the what's it called? The January 6th Commission. They do all the foreshadowing where they go, and next thing, we'll be telling you about how, this person knew that everything he was doing was illegal.
Let me see it.
But wait until Thursday, because that's when we'll tell you all about it.
So basically, though, just while we're on this slide, just to put a fine point on it, using a hybrid approach, so including the other things that Scott's going to talk a little bit about in a little bit more detail in a minute, is saving the town about $150 million.
152.
Yeah.
Like 2 million, give or take,
And this particular approach is probably $20 million more expensive because of the downtown sewer than his previous iteration. Is that about right, Scott?
I'd have to go back and look at it, Kurt. I'm not sure. But yeah, probably not too far. Maybe 10 million, 20 million.
So in your timeline, Scott,
yep.
What, like basically say this $30.5 million is like real money.
Yep.
Okay, so typically what you do in a town is you'd say, okay, we want to phase this out. So we're gonna borrow 5 million here, we're gonna borrow 5 million here, we're gonna buy 10 million there, 15 million there, and all of a sudden we're at 30.5. Is this 30.5 phased out over time, or is this $30.5 million in 2022 money?
Well, I'm going to let Anastasia respond to that in detail, but my quick thought is, if you're digging up Main Street and Commercial Street, you want to get that done in one shot or maybe two shots. So I'm thinking this kind of happens in one shot. And when we talk about financing, the good news, there's a lot of good news right now. One is, I think DEP is ready to approve this thing, which is exciting. But the other good news is there's a lot of money around right now. And an economy that doesn't look so good when you read the headlines every day. But right now, for this kind of stuff, there's a lot of money around. So I think the financing and the grant forgiveness, so-called, is likely. So my general sense is, and again, I'll ask Anastasia to respond, is if we're going to do this, let's get it done and let's get the money. And as we'll get into later, August 15th is one of the magic deadlines.
Aha, that's why when you said August 15th. Pay attention. This is just like the January 6th Commission.
Right now, ideally, to follow up on what Scott's saying is if we as a committee ultimately, can take a vote on this today and we approve it and forward it to the Board of Selectmen. If the Board of Selectmen approve it and send it to DEP, we should be in a position to meet that August 15th deadline, but there's not a lot of time left. And I think as Scott said, it's very likely that the economy is going to go into a recession in the next 18 months. That's what most economists.
Hush your mouth. Hush your mouth.
I didn't say that.
Yeah, no, I didn't say it either. I've heard this from a number of relatively
People are saying,
well-heeled economists. And the only reason for saying that is that the likelihood that the kind of monies that are available right now to help fund this, that they're going to be available in a recessionary environment is that a recessionary environment is going to basically take all that money off the table.
So just a real brief add-on to that is the funding cycle for a lot of them. There's many funding sources, but the most likely one, or likely two, is SRF, which is a state revolving fund, and then the Cape and Islands Clean Water Trust, which comes from the short-term rental tax money that you've been contributing at $800K, I just learned, for the last year for Wellfleet. That can have a 25% or maybe even a 50% forgiveness, meaning grant versus financing. That money is available on a once a year application of August 15th. So you get on the list or you don't get on the list. And a lot of the stuff in this plan is adaptive management, meaning we can change a lot of it later, like the disposal site, the details of the sewer shed. There's a lot of flexibility here. But I think I'm going to suggest that we move towards that August 15th deadline. And I think you're going to see DEP is coming down. Hillary can talk about this. She just heard from the commissioner of DEP, the #1 guy, who's going to come to Wellfleet next week, and along with Millie, the regional director. So these guys are excited about this. And what was that saying about strike while the iron's hot, that kind of thing? I kind of feel it's hot.
Make hay while the sun shines.
So do you have more, Anastasia, or in this?
So this was my last slide in this presentation.
Okay. So are there any other questions on the sort of the sewer shed concepts and the difference between these two? And
So if you take $30.5 million and you divide it by 280, which is the number of hookups potentially, 278. Am I getting this right?
mm-hmm.
Was
You
that,
are.
what does anybody? I do have a calculator, but
Scott's got a slide in his report that shows the cost per connection.
and what is that?
Well, I'm looking for it right now.
About 100.
I'm just doing the math. 30
If you want to.
million,
I'll share my
500,000.
slides, Anastasia.
108,000.
$108,000 divided by
No, that's per connection.
30.5 divided by 278 is 108,000.
109,712. Yeah.
I'm looking at my slide. Here it is. Okay, Anastasia, can I show us?
Perfect,
Oh,
yeah.
here we go. Okay, hold on. Let's see, share. Can you see that?
Mhm.
Okay, so I got two slides I can show you. This is what I've done is I've taken Anastasia's numbers, which are at the top here. These are her numbers, I think. And Anastasia, you can check me.
Scott, can you roll? Yeah, just pull
There
it
you
down.
go.
A little
Sorry,
bit.
so
There you
his
go.
hybrid
Perfect.
and traditional, right?
Mhm.
So I believe these are the numbers that Anastasia showed you. If not, they're close, and I'll change them. What I did is I added in the 95 Lawrence costs, which is here. And that's a cluster system, and this is a cluster system here, a large cluster system. And then here's the IA septics, and I'm using a number of 35,000 per system, which I think right now is a little high, but by the time we get going, I think it's worth having there. I mean, the numbers are now 27, 28 on average, but I'm using 35K per system. And you can see that we need, and the reason why these are more expensive, the reason why this is still pretty expensive in the conventional is these are at 19 milligrams per liter, so we need more of them. And these are at 8 milligrams per liter. So this is just a different assumption as to which system we ultimately use. And so here's the bottom line numbers. It's 100 versus 230, roughly 240. And then I have this other slide, and we can come back to this, is to answer your other question. And I think I have this. Oh, wait, let me go. Well, I can show you this. Actually, this has been updated as of recently as today. So what I did is these, I think these are, this column here would be the capital cost per connection. And again, Anastasia, I hope we get your numbers right here. This is the, well, let me just start from the top. This is the INA, enhanced INA systems depending on performance. The cost is obviously the same, but the efficiency, when you look at the dollars per kilogram removed, changes obviously. This is the 19 milligram per liter system, which is the general approved one right now. This is the range that I analyzed for the enhanced INA, and then I'm using 8 as the planning number, but it's probably in that range there. We've then got the 2 sewering proposals at 3 and 5 milligram per liter. And this one here, the lower number per hookup is town-wide. That's the bigger system. And that's because, as Anastasia has shown me, that the bigger it gets, the more efficient it gets, right? So that's why that's less per connection, but the total number is bigger because you're sewering a lot of the town. And then Ryan actually asked me to put in the 95 Lawrence just for comparison. And so that's what this cluster A and B is. A is the housing project, the municipal buildings and the neighborhood, and B is just the housing project and the municipal buildings. But you can see that's according to the numbers Bowler gave us. I'm using their numbers here. And I think we've got fairly close to apples and apples, although Anastasia, I'm happy to have you look at that. This looks like the range of numbers on a
So that 109,000 was just what we calculated. And you're basically saying you got to look at it all. And this is a great depiction of that. My next question is going to be going, okay, so say we're in the $109,000 per hookup range, okay, for the downtown, right? How do you sell that? And I'm like kind of thinking in terms of, okay, well, wait a minute. All of a sudden, we're going to have the ability to put in more businesses in the downtown because there's a way from the deal with their effluents, and that may bring a lot of money into the town. And the other part about this is that 109,800 per property, it's an investment in the town for the future, and sometimes you got to make those investments, just like in town water and everything else. And maybe there's a good comparison there. We finally put in town water. How much did it cost that each person each thing per hookup over the period? I bet it's in the neighborhood of $50,000 a hookup for the original thing. But over years and years, you pay in that back, or you're getting it back in other ways. My point is that we have to show the town that 109,800 ain't so bad. Is there any other towns that have done this same kind of math and said, hey, $109,800 per hookup is pretty damn good?
Yeah, I think the big issue is that what Scott's put together is a hybrid plan that includes a variety of technologies, which diversifies the risk of anything, both in terms of siting, in terms of ultimate efficacy, et cetera. But I kind of want to bring us all back to one item, which for me is foremost, because I'm not sure that a sewer plan is an economic development strategy. I mean, businesses are not necessarily going to locate based on wastewater treatment. There's so many other factors that play into a decision for a business to locate in a particular area. And Wellfleet has its unique challenges, whether it's downtown or any of the other parts of town. We've lost a number of restaurants, not due to septic or due to wastewater disposal issues. But the bigger issue in my mind is that fundamentally our targeted watershed management plan needs to address one thing, and that's eutrophication. And eutrophication is excess phytoplankton. When that excess phytoplankton dies, it sucks all the oxygen out of the water. It creates a reduction in eelgrass habitat, eelgrass dies off from the lack of light that flows into the water. And what this, what Scott's kind of focused on here is something that does include a number of elements that go to address eutrophication, and basically phytoplankton reduction through both elements of the shellfish program and the ecological restoration. My biggest concern with the plan is there's not enough focus on that. The permeable reactive barrier has been zeroed out. And if I look at the ecological restoration, I wasn't quite clear that it included the Mayo Creek restoration, or maybe it did, but there wasn't anything in Duck Creek any longer. So, I'm pretty convinced based on the science, based on, what the Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies has done, and Agnes Mittemeyer's work that shows no human component for the, Black Mayo. One of the big problem from eutrophication isn't showing a human fingerprint. So, I mean, we are doing what DEP has asked us to do. We're doing what I think the community is comfortable and has supported doing. And I think that's what Scott's tried to weave here is, threading the needle between, what DEP is going to accept, what the community is going to accept, and what ultimately is going to produce a reduction in nitrogen at the Sentinel Station in Wellfleet Harbor. And I think that's one of the other things that we need to keep in mind here. I mean, it was sort of when Anastasia was saying, well, do we want sewers here? Do we want sewers there? We can do that. Anybody can do that. The question is it going to solve the problem, and does it make financial and economic sense? So, as Scott said before, we've got an August 15th deadline. There's a lot of things in here that I'm kind of personally a little uncomfortable about. The Board of Selectmen has asked us to respond and do and incorporate these things. Scott and Anastasia have done a wonderful job of responding to that. We as a committee, I think, would serve the citizens well to probably approve this thing so that we can meet that August 15th deadline and move on. I still think, based on adaptive management and other scientific concerns, that we need to do more on the ecological restoration side. But clearly, this is something that DEP will accept. I think the community should embrace, and I would hope the Board of Selectmen would as well.
So, Kurt, are you looking for a motion here? Because I can give you a motion right now.
Well, it's up to you. If we're kind of
we've been doing this for God knows how many years.
12.
Okay. And I've been kind of going, and I figured it out. It took, for the first year I was kind of confused, and now I figured it out, and so I'm kind of I know it went into this. I move that we approve this thing. And
Second.
BOS and just say, boom, guys, we've handed you a really, really nice ice cream cake here. Yeah.
Jude has her hand up, Kurt.
Jude, go ahead. You can
Oh,
unmute
sorry.
yourself.
Thanks. So I hear what you're saying, and I understand what you're saying, that we can change this plan and that it's also an adaptive management approach. But so therefore, I'm a little concerned that you're discussing, disbanding this committee, which is so helpful. And I appreciate all your volunteering, but where do we go once the plan's submitted, if not with this committee? Who will be doing the adaptive management, and who will help us fine tune it like we're talking about?
That's a great question. The committee in the past, and working with the water board, had suggested,
A position.
essentially creating a department level position, somebody that would oversee this. Scott in the past has talked about the kind of candidates that are currently being mined at schools like Tufts and Harvard in this particular area. It's a very interesting area academically. So, at the end of the day, you're right, Jude, somebody needs to be in charge. There's not bandwidth within town right now, and to handle it, most towns do have a combined water and sewer department or something that looks like that. The town of Wellfleet does not right now. It's currently operating both water and wastewater with volunteer boards. There are very few other people that do that. So I think a solution that has been discussed and which town meeting supported was, in creating a department level position that would oversee it. I mean, clearly, if we're gonna build, these sewer sheds, as Anastasia alluded to, you've got to have operators at those locations. There's a people element that's going to be essential going forward. The more that we get into those kind of hard infrastructure investments in the town. So it's not something that we take on lightly. Jude, I think it's a very, very important thing to be thinking about. At this stage of the game, all we can do is respond to what DEP has asked us to do, to at least get some agreement on a series of technologies and strategies, and then figure out how to implement them. So they have to agree that these strategies will work and that they're comfortable with them. And then we got to figure out how to implement them. Fred?
I just want to say is there's a motion on the floor to be voted on, and B, plans are meant to be changed, new technology could come on, everything else. But I've been in the grant giving business for 30 years. You got to have a plan. If we have a plan, then we can go after the money. If we don't have a plan that's approved, we can't go after the money. Am I saying that wrong, Scott?
Okay, I get that. I'm just, wondering about that. And then the other thing is the last time Millie came, it was July 16th, 2019, when the shellfishing community was very much there about the oysters being used. And I'm just wondering, where we're at with that, because it's still some unknowns about the black mayonnaise and whether the oysters contribute to that. And I just wondered what outreach you've done again to the shellfish community, since it sounds like it's integral to the plan.
Well, I can tell you what's in the plan, but you want to go
there's
first?
there's shellfish in the plan, but certainly to my view, not nearly enough, because shellfish do consume phytoplankton. So the eutrophication is a result of excess phytoplankton.
But
To
the
the extent-
removing of the oysters needing to happen to remove the nitrogen was still an outstanding question, and one that Mashpee's still dealing with.
Yeah, and it's a great point, Jude. And we are continuing to push that with DEP, because DEP should be about habitat restoration and not destroying the habitat, which is essentially what happens when you're harvesting oysters. But that's a sidebar. I personally feel that there's things that will need to be continued in terms of effort and changes, as Scott and Fred both said, to this plan as it goes forward. But I think it's a balanced plan. There's things I don't like about it, but I think it's a balanced plan, and one that we should support, and one that hopefully the Board of Selectmen will support, so we can in fact go forward for funding and begin the process of actually making the positive impacts on the environment that we're trying to create.
So I'm going to go back to my point A before, which was there is a motion on the table.
Yeah, you want to move the question? I
We
just
already
wanted
did.
to.
It was already moved. It was already moved.
And I
No,
already
no, no, I
Sorry.
mean,
in
Yeah, no,
Russia,
no, I-
so now we have to vote on it.
yes.
Okay?
Hillary, you've been quiet. Did you have anything else to add? She's making dinner. No, she's left us. She's left the inmates in charge of the asylum. Well, there's a motion on the floor. It's been seconded. All those in favor?
Aye,
Aye. Roll call. Kurt, yes. Fred?
yes.
Richard?
Yes.
I know John Kumbler vicariously sends his support.
I've worked on.
Oh, there you are. Nope, I guess
We
not.
lost her.
John also enthusiastically supports this. He sent his apologies that he wasn't able to be here. But he's thrilled with the changes that, Scott, you and Anastasia have made. And so I think there's a vicarious and unanimous sentiment from the committee in support of this plan. So thank you.
I mean, now that we finished that boat thing, I mean, just going back to what Jude was talking about and the shellfish, I mean, the bottom line is that there are so many filter feeders out there that live off all the wonderful stuff that is coming out of our all the sewage out that's going in there. I'm not sewage, but the nitrates and everything. Everybody I know is saying that the right amount of nitrates is good for shellfish. And right now, is we're putting out too much.
Well, I see it differently, and the
simply, I'm being really simple here.
Yeah, the thing that the science shows is we've got too much, and if you look at the trend in shellfish population over the last 300 years, we're down at only about 5% of what we used to have. Another thing that isn't well understood scientifically, but is even if we took all the nitrogen out, let's say we stopped all, let's say it was really people, and we actually stopped nitrogen from going into the harbor, which isn't really what the issue is anyway. Phytoplankton will switch over to using phosphorus instead of nitrogen in their in their cycle. So a nitrogen-starved environment does not stop phytoplankton production, and that's something that John Waterbury from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, who's probably one of the world's foremost phycologists, told me some time ago. He has the largest algae collection in the world down at Woods Hole, and was the curator for many years. And he said, look, phytoplankton out in the open ocean, they use phosphorus. They don't use nitrogen. So the other piece here is that, dirty little secret, we can stop all the nitrogen in the world and we're not going to fix the problem. It's a phytoplankton problem. And until we balance the amount of phytoplankton in the ecosystem, we're going to continue to have black mayonnaise, and we're going to continue to have this eutrophic environment. So it's more complicated than just simply doing things on the land side. We've got to be focused on the marine side as well.
And I just want to go to one other thing that I heard Jude say, which is that, well, our charge was to get a permit. We get a permit, and all of a sudden we can kind of go look at this. We can disband. Well, I don't think the town is going to let us disband. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I'd like to, maybe not I would like to do, but I think this board would like to see in place to say, okay, now we're good. We're never going to be good. There's just too much stuff going on. But
that's true, Fred. However, I think that sentiment is shared. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if people, I don't know how people view our effort.
All I'm saying is that this board will morph into another board, or maybe be added into somebody's job title, but the town itself is being stretched. And I think it's a good thing. The more we stretch, the more we become a viable place for people to live and raise families and all that good, happy shit.
Well, the board of, you're right, Fred. I mean, your point is well taken. At the end of the day, the Board of Selectmen will have to decide, how they want to move forward with this. Our charge per charter, per what the Board of Selectmen originally crafted as, as our standing orders, was to produce a watershed plan. So, at the end of that, if they want to change the charge or add to the charge or whatever they'd like to do, that's completely up to the discretion of the Board of Selectmen. But, I think, in fairness to the committee, I think the committee's put in a huge amount of effort and done a great job. And, if the committee members want to lobby the Board of Selectmen for a second role or something like that, that's up to you. But
I worked in federal government for 30 years, guys, 30 years. And this was like watching snow melt. So long.
I'll have to share. You remember who Brian Dudley is, right? He retired from
Absolutely.
DEP.
Well, I know.
So
I knew when
he
I worked
actually reemerged today and gave a presentation that I attended, and one of his slides, it said plan, comma, plan, comma, plan. And then he said, notice that I didn't say plan, 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 plan. So what his point was, this takes a long time. You have to put a lot of thought into it, but it shouldn't go on forever. And
Yeah,
I think
you
that's,
gotta,
it-
you gotta get something in the work.
yeah,
You say,
yeah,
Amend it, you change it, you do all these things.
yeah.
But it was really well thought out. It's been done. Guys, it's now 4. I don't even know. It's after 4.
4:00.
I think we're getting close to a motion to adjourn. Is that what you're driving at?
I'm driving at that because it's, either way, I'm adjourned. Okay. I really appreciate it. Love seeing you guys. It's great hanging with you. But you know, it's like
So that was a motion.
second.
Did I hear a second? Terrific.
second.
All those in favor?
Good night, everybody.
Aye.
Hey, great.
Thank you,
guys have a
Anastasia,
great time.
Scott. Thank you.
Scott, Anastasia,
Thank you very much.
Richard, everybody, you rock.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful weekend. Thanks.
You too.
And Hillary, wherever you are.
I'm here.